Well, hello again. The heat index outside has been topping 100 degrees for several days, and I'm not inclined to go out today. It's Sunday. I'm going to relax. I'm going to do a few segments on the radio, and then I'm going to watch a couple of movies. Later on, I'll go out and do something after the sun goes down, but only for a few minutes. So let's get started. In the last video, I told you we'd kick off this one by replacing the capacitors. And then maybe, I don't know if we're going to get to it or not. Once again, I want to apply some power to it and bring it up slowly and see what happens after I replace the capacitors. Everything else checks out good. Well, all the, these here. The only problem I have is this right here. I'm not too crazy about it. I'm going to have to really be careful. It's kind of frayed right there. If you can make it out there. I don't want it. Of course, it won't make it explode, but it'll ground out the signal to the tube. I don't want that. This one doesn't have it. This goes to the grid, I think. If can't remember. But these are rusted on. That's a real problem there. We're going to have to open these up. I've got to open these up. They're full of all kinds of crap, especially this one. I'm going to have to change this wire. But, we'll take a wire brush and clean it and do whatever we have to do to try to get the rust off. Got to be careful with these babies. If you snap that thing off, oh, I don't know. You're going to have some problems. Anyway, back to the capacitors. This thing came in without the original capacitor. Whether it was good or bad, it would have been nice to have it. This is YouTuber D-Lab with his young granddaughter several years ago when he was getting ready to restore a Crosley 655. The chassis in the 655 is almost identical to the one in the 635 that we're repairing. Look at the size of that filter can. That's incredible. I think that's the tallest one I think I've ever seen. So we're going to have to do something. So let me show you what some of the options are. Like this one here, a 3-tab can with one negative. The negative, I guess, is this copper part. Then you got 3 positives on there. Each of those, that's a 310 microfarads at 450 volts, but they want about $40 for it, plus shipping, plus tax. Yeah, that's not for me. The reason being, that one capacitor can would cost almost as much as I paid for the whole radio. That's not going to happen. We could do what the last owner did, who had it repaired. I don't know who repaired it, but we can replace the caps underneath, just like this. That would be okay, as long as they're out of the way. But it would leave that big hole empty at the top. If you can live with it, not a problem. Remember, this is a cheapo radio from the 1935, the height of the Great Depression. I don't think people worried about it too much. Another option is to restuff a smaller can and put it in there. And I went out in my shop and looked around in my drawers, and I found one I must have been going to restuff at one time. And I never did. I guess I decided against it. I don't even remember. But this thing takes 8 microfarad, 450 volts. And I'm going to wind up putting 10s in here, okay? So anyway, we could do that. We could take this can. I don't even remember doing all this. I'd have to drill another hole in there. That's a piece of what they call hardboard, I guess. I can't remember what we used to call it. But it would fit in there like that, and I could clamp this together, and it would be nice. And then go ahead and put this baby on. Put your, restuff it with new capacitors, and put the leads down through there. And then put this baby on top. And I used to use a big wide piece of aluminum tape to hold it together, but for this, if we decide to restuff it, I've got some 3/4 inch aluminum tape, so we'd use that. So that's another option you have of doing it. Another option is to do practically the same thing, except don't put the top on it, okay? Just take it off and go ahead and mount your replacement new capacitors vertically in there and leave them exposed. Be a great conversation piece. Wouldn't make any difference. It wouldn't be harmful because that's it, masonite. That's it. I couldn't remember the name of that crap. But you could just drill your hole like I did before. You don't want to be putting them all down through the same hole. You can put the positives down through there as long as they're insulated, but you don't want to put the negative with it. You want the negative to go drill a second hole for the negative, okay? keep those separated. As long as you put your heat shrink on, you know, really insulated, but still drill your second hole for your negative wire. So you could do that and clamp it up and leave it, like I said, leave them exposed. Another option is to use a piece of PVC pipe. Now this is a, what do they call a junction point, connector, you know. I forget what they call that thing. You could put it in there like that with an insulator around it to take up the space, then clamp it down. Put your some kind of a disc in there to keep the capacitor. So you essentially be doing the same thing with it that you did, you know, you were doing with this. Okay, you can if you grind this thing down, you can slip it on down and then fit it down in there. Also, that's another way to do it. Grind these bumps off. There's all kinds of ways you could do it. You know, you just got to be creative. I could, you know, put a disc in the bottom, just like I did this one here, and glue it in place, and then put the capacitors down there and put a cap on the top. Or, you know, not a cap that was glued. You could like push it down in there, you know, to where you could take it off if you needed it. You don't need to glue everything in sight, and that would work too. Put some kind of thick thing around there, a pad of some kind, clamp it down, or you could just leave the caps exposed. The only problem with leaving them exposed is, you know, there's a lot of dirt can go inside there, you know, over the years and pile up. Not that I'll be around to worry about it by the time it happens. You could go with a really heavy-duty cardboard tube also. Cut a disc out of it. You know, cut it. You know, it doesn't have to be that high. Cut it down about that high. Take the top and cut a disc out of it and glue it on top, and you can paint it on the outside. You know, paint it silver, black, whatever. So what have I decided to use? Yeah, I told you I think you ought to try being creative a little bit. So I'm going to use a pill bottle. Yes, I am. Got it from the vet, and my dog's had some medication in it. That's essentially the same thing as this right here, but I've got a ready-made top that I do not have to tape together with silver tape or anything. I'll tighten this up just a little bit to where it holds it nice and snug. It's pretty snug right now. I'll put the capacitors in there vertically, down with holes down through the middle. I'll show you how that's all done. And if I ever have to get in there and change it, or anyone in the future has to get in there and change it, all you got to do is press down, turn it to the left, and she comes right open. Let's take a look at the schematic now. What I have here, I've got a 10 microfarad at 450 volts, 10 microfarad at 450 volts, and then I've got a 22 microfarad at 400. Now each of these three electrolytic capacitors, according to the parts list, are supposed to be 8 microfarad at 450. Now these two here will be fine. Now this is something you may run into yourself, okay? That's why I'm bringing it up. I could have just gone ahead and installed the capacitors and then, you know, hooked up the radio to find out if it would work. Anyway, my question was, I wonder if I can use, would 22 microfarad at 400 volt, would it work for 10Z right here? Long enough that I can hook up, you know, a power wire, bring the radio up on the variac until to find out if it's going to play. Because I've checked out everything, it should play. And if it doesn't, then I'll just go back to the drawing board. And if it does, I figured, you know, I told Brendan, my electronics mentor up in Michigan, I told him, you know, if it works, I'll just disconnect all the electrolytics and take off the tuner and start de-rusting the radio, stuff like the chassis. And I said, but I'm concerned about this. Would I be able to use it just temporarily? I was more concerned with the voltage level. You know, as I've always been taught, hey, look, don't go under. You can always go over. Well, I don't know if that's true in all cases. This may be one of them, so that's why I contacted Brendan. It's just going to be temporary. I'm not going to play it for an hour or two. Anyway, he wrote back and he said, well, John, the voltage should be okay. He figured out somehow that the maximum voltage that would be coming out of right here off the cathode, he said off the 5Z4, he said it'll usually pop out pretty high when you first turn on your keep in mind now, this is where the signal's coming off the cathode, okay? Comes across to the positive side of this 10Z4 or 10Z filter capacitor, and then it comes around and goes back to the center tap. So, believe it or not, this is the most negative point in the circuitry in the radio. Right here, the cathode is the most positive point, voltage-wise. higher voltage here, a lot less here, down to 0. So he said that it'll pop up real quick for a while, then it'll go down and you'll probably run maximum of about 200 volts. Well, that made me feel a lot better. And I said, well, why would they put 450 volt capacitors in this thing if we're only going to run 200 volts, or maybe let's just say 300 volts? And he said, well, yeah, it was probably cheaper just to buy them all, you know, one voltage rating and just throw them in there and it would work. He said, essentially what he was saying, could be 100 reasons, I don't know. But he said, this radio will not get these things up to 450 volts. I said, okay, now fine. Now what about the capacity? You know, 22 microfarads versus 8. And he said, now this is, I really want you to understand this stuff, you know. You're not always locked into what it says on the schematic. It's always good to go with what the schematic says, but, you know, sometimes as you get more developed as a tech and you do this stuff repetitively, you find out that there's a lot of fudging that can be done without any problem, without risking safety. So he said, well, the 5Z4 rectifier tube can handle up to a 40 microfarad output capacitor, output filter here capacitor, up to 40 microfarads. He said, so your 22 is going to be well within tolerance. Now most people would say, okay, well thanks a lot, I appreciate it, and just throw it in there, but not me. I can't work that way. I need to know how he found out, how did he know that takes up to 40, he can handle up to a 40 microfarad capacitor? And I kept thinking about it, I said, you know, he said he looked it up, but I didn't know where he could have looked it up at. And I didn't really want to contact him back because I sent him about 90 emails that morning about everything under the sun. And I said, I wonder if it's in the tube manual I got. That was just kind of an afterthought. So let's take a look at the tube manual. Now this is my tube manual. I've showed this before. It's the RCA receiving tube manual. It's the RC, where is it, 14, RC 14. Now this is the first book I ever bought when I started repairing these radios. And I bought it under the recommendation of an Antique Radio Forum member who's now deceased. His name was Kurt Reed. He said, John, he said, do yourself a favor, buy this tube manual. It will come in handy a multitude of times. He was 100% right, 1,000% right. I've used this thing to the point that it's just amazing. They should teach this in schools. Anyway, here it is. You know, another chance to utilize it. So I went to the tube manual and I looked up 5Z4, and it's a full wave high vacuum rectifier. And I went down the list. I'm looking at everything here for a anything here that says output condenser. That is an input filter. What do you see where that arrow is? Check that out. It says when a filter input condenser larger than 40 microfarads is used, it says you got to do something else. Well, that tells me right there 40 is pretty much the maximum, unless I do something else and put a larger one in there. So 40 is what we're going to go with, and I've got a 22. It'll work fine. The two positives on the 10X, no, the 10Y, the two positives on the 10Z and the 10Y hook together. Right there, they come together. So I can take both positives on the capacitors and hook them together. I can just wrap them together. Well, that's what I'm talking about. They both, I just took this one and bent it over and wrapped it around 2-3 times and soldered it in place. Now all I have to do is run a single wire for the positive down through the cap of the pill bottle. Just one. Now the other side, the negatives, I'll wrap one around this side and one around that side, or both down the same side. I don't know, but they will go through the they'll go through the cap in two different places, two different holes. Okay. Now the positive ends of these caps are probably, you know, they're going to have at least 200 volts on them, and I don't want to run them down through the cap. The cap won't cause a problem, but once it gets to the other side, I don't want it hitting anything or coming close to anything in the chassis that might cause a spark or something. So this is called spaghetti tubing. I bought this is .062 outside diameter, .031 inside diameter. Okay, and I wrote it on there just to make sure I wouldn't forget it. I bought this stuff, my gosh, 25 years ago. I bought it on this roll. That's all I got left. I bought that long before I met Brendan, long before I was on the YouTube. It was back in my antique radio days, antique radio forum. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a piece of this stuff. This is really great stuff. I really like using it. When I bought this, it was very difficult to find. So when I did find it, I snapped it right up on eBay. Anyway, I'm going to slip it on up there and cut it. And then I could essentially do the same for this, which I might do. I don't want anything touching the ground. It might be live in here either. So we'll see. What I've done here is I just took the negative leads and just bent them down around, one on one side and one on the other, so they wouldn't interfere with each other. And I soldered some, wire onto the end of each one. And then I'm going to go ahead and push down this heat shrink to cover each one, and then I'll shrink it on down. It should cover it. So just like that. Let me get that done. Well, there it is, guys. I'm going to take some hot glue and lay it down underneath there to where it's nice and secure. I'm not going to put it along the edges. You put it along the edges, you won't get the bottle to seat down in there and turn to the right. I just got a little hot glue gun here. It works fine. Fine for years. Well, that's it, guys. I didn't put a ton of glue in it. I put a little bit between them to hold them together, and then a little bit at the base where the wires went through, that sort of thing. You don't want to go hog wild with it. It's not going to have any strain on it, but just in case, Let's get the bottle on and see if it'll fit. Oh, she fits like a glove, nice and snug too, just the way I wanted it. Alright, I'll tell you what, this video is, again, it's getting really long. I may have to wind up finishing this and powering it up in the next video. I've decided that yes, it is getting a little long, and by the time I did what I wanted to do, it would be even twice as long, so we're going to save that for the next video. But I did manage, I put this red wire with some heat shrink on the positive of the electrolytics inside this pill bottle. Anyway, this thing has to come out anyway because it's blocking the hole up under here through the chassis that this thing has to go through. So by the time I remove that and do everything else, it's going to be very time consuming. So I thought I'd just go ahead and wrap it up with a little puzzle. Yeah, for some of you new guys. Now you're going to like this, I think. Now this is 10X, as you can see it right there. See, 10X. Now if you come over here and look at our schematic, let me zoom her in here so we get a nice clear picture. 10X has the one side connected to ground, and the other side goes between the two resistors in the can dome. This is the can dome. Okay, so we'll go ahead and take a look at where the thing is connected. Now I said one side is connected to ground over here. Okay, there's the ground. This is the negative coming out of that capacitor. It comes around, it goes over here and connects to ground. Okay, so far so good. Now the positive is supposed to go, as I said, between the two resistors, which should be right in, should be right there. Okay, that black wire right there, that's the one that goes over here to the capacitor. So that's in the right spot. Between the two resistors in the center is that wire right there. Goes to the positive of that capacitor. But when you take a look at it, what's this brown thing? This brown resistor is also hooked to the positive of that capacitor. Well, I don't understand that. Is this something they added? Is that one of the previous owners? It's a 1. 1 is the brown, black is a 0, and then 4 is yellow. So that's a 100K resistor right there. It says you go by the BD, body end dot. Spells the word bed, okay? Easy to remember. 1, 0, 4 zeros. That's 100,000 ohms, or 100K. Well, there's our ground side is good. We come out of here. There's no 100K resistor here. What's the deal on that? It's connected right to it. I mean, it's right there. I mean, it's not even a quarter of an inch away. All right, what's going on here? Somebody had to have had that. Now, a young guy who just started out, or someone who's inexperienced and hasn't got quite enough experience under his belt, he would possibly remove that thing. But why is it not? Why is it not right here on the schematic? Kind of strange. Maybe they left it off, huh? No, they did not leave it off. It is there, and I'm going to show you where it's at. You ready? 100,000 ohm resistor. We got to find that resistor. We come up here. It's not there. Not there. And here's a capacitor, so it's not there either. Let's follow this baby around. Come up here. It's not there either. Keep coming, keep coming. Come up here. There is a resistor right there. Yes. But all it is the number of the resistor, 33. Part 33, we look straight across, resistor, 100,000 ohms. There it is right there, 100K. Now most people would follow it back from the plate. They wouldn't go through all the gyrations I just did. But I wanted you to take it a long way around, you know, the forest here. What I wanted to point out by this little exercise was, you know, when you look on the schematic, you see that this line went here and then up and then all the way across practically across the entire radio, then all the way up to here, right, to get to that resistor. When in fact, the stupid thing is less than a quarter of an inch away. And it's directly connected to the plate of the 6K7 tube. So there's really no distance there at all. That would really be a mind boggler to some people. And I've pointed out many times in the videos I've made that just because it's a long way on the schematic doesn't mean it's a long way in the chassis. So keep that in mind. Well, that's going to be it for now. Next time we will in fact rip these three things out. It'll be a piece of cake now that we got everything else done. It's just a matter of ripping them out. I'm going to tack solder them in just long enough to test the radio. I got to hook up the speaker. And if everything hopefully plays, then we'll just untack solder it. And then start cleaning up the chassis, remove the tuner. You know, small radio, lots of little things to do. And if it does play, I'm also going to coat this coil right here that's got all the wax flaking off of it. I want to get that covered before any damage happens. I want to cover that with some liquid tape. Or now you could use liquid tape or you could use clear nail polish. I think what I'm going to do is use both. I think I'll put a coat of clear nail polish on it and then put a little bit of liquid tape over the top. Now, I'm not gonna saturate it with liquid tape. It's just going to be enough to cover the area where I put the clear nail polish, if I can find my nail polish. I used it for my toes last night. Okay, until next time, this is John.